This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Good evening and welcome to Monday's Late Late Show. I'm your host, Rae. Tonight we will be talking about setting in secondary schools. So we'll be talking about set classes, mixed ability classes across a range of different subject areas. What works, what doesn't, personal experiences, and what works best.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
We had a similar topic last Late Late Show that I was hosting 2 weeks ago, and there were a significant number of technical issues, mostly to do with sound. So what I have done is decided to reapproach this topic because it is such an important issue to me. It takes up a lot of my headspace. And as a secondary English teacher, I spend a lot of my time reflecting on how I can support all of the students in my classroom, as we all do. But I also experience a lot of regular frustration with the way things are set up. So when the last fortnight show didn't quite go according to plan, it was a real shame because our guest was a member of the SLT at my school, and she was in charge of teaching and learning, and she had loads of insights, well-researched ground of knowledge on the subject. And she said a lot of things that made me think twice or a third time about my position on setting in secondary schools, particularly within English, because she was also an English teacher. But by the end of it, I didn't really feel in my core terribly different from how I felt at the start. But one thing I have realized since that technologically doomed episode is that I think I kind of underestimated how widespread setting is in a number of contexts. I was speaking to a few different teachers of a few different subjects, including geography, history, and I hadn't realized that a lot more schools set in those subjects than I'd previously thought. I made some comment last time about something to the effect of if option subjects had the capacity to set, if they had the number, if they had the uptake, if they had the number of students to provide set classes for, there would be many more conversations about taking that approach, and they probably would set a lot of them if they could. But it was more a matter of numbers. Option subjects, other than English, maths, and science, where everybody has to do it. So you've got students in the hundreds in most cases. But I've realized that a lot of schools actually do set. They have the numbers or they make it work, and they do actually set a lot more subjects than I previously thought. So our guest tonight is a head of chemistry and a teaching and learning lead, and Richard Beard is here to share his thoughts on the subject. Again, very knowledgeable, very experienced, and as he's a science teacher, I'm quite interested to hear his thoughts on this, because again, core subject, and one that a lot of people, I think more teachers than not would agree that science classes should be set. I feel like science and maths kind of get a free pass in that regard, whereas everybody else has to have a conversation about it. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I am again misinformed and ill-experienced to talk about it. So, Richard, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
And I can hear you. This is refreshing. Okay, so this is such a relief. All right. So, Richard, do you want to introduce yourself to listeners? Tell us a bit about your teaching experience and in the different types of schools you've worked in, and maybe why you're particularly interested in this topic.
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah. So I started teaching in 2005, and I worked in state schools for about 10 years. And I worked up to be, I was an advanced skills teacher. So yeah, it's kind of like when that was popular. Obviously, that's not so much now, but I found myself doing training all around the local schools and such and so forth, and doing training all the time and observing hundreds and hundreds of lessons, to be honest. Um, and then I became an assistant head in charge of teaching and learning. And then I went from the state system and I joined the private system, independent system, and now I work at a place called Concord College, which I've been there ever since. I am head of chemistry. I'm an IT teaching and learning lead. So at some point, I'll probably slip in some AI into the conversation.
Oh, excellent.
Passionate about AI. Um, and also a boarding parent here at the school. I am passionate about setting, and I do think it depends on the setting of the school. It's a horrible use of a word, but yes.
Yeah. Okay. So you've got experience in the independent sector as well, which I also find interesting. I have a number of friends and former colleagues that have jumped ship, so to speak, and moved to independent schools. And hearing them talk about them, it's like an entirely different world. Would you say that it's a similar teaching experience, or it's a very different one? What are the similarities and differences? I know they're all different, but can you give us like general broad strokes?
Well, I'll try and keep this quick because this will be a very long answer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, first of all, no schools are the same, whether you're in the state sector or whether you're in the private sector or independent sector. So, I mean, journalists and such seem to try and tar things with the same brush far too often when actually it's completely different. So, I don't really want to be general around
Right.
around either. But what I can say about the school I work in is it's completely different to what you do. So when I was in the state sector, it was all about trying to engage the kids, keeping it very, very entertaining, making sure the behaviour was, A1, and your processes for keeping that behaviour good were really good. And if you didn't get your first 5 minutes of your lesson absolute spot on, behaviour would start to slip and things like that. And that was really, really, really important. And then basically it was very much structured as well. So when I was in the States and I was in charge of teaching and learning, we would have a set pro forma for observing lessons, which had a lot of tick boxes that you would have to go through. I'm sure lots of your listeners will know exactly what I'm talking about because that's where the state sector is in many schools. And then basically as well, that's when I wrote a book, which I'm not plugging, by the way, because it's not really on sale anymore. But I wrote a book called Outstanding Lessons Made Simple, where I tried to structure the lessons at that point into a very simple kind of. But lots of people have their plans for how you do an amazing lesson and things like that.
Yeah.
There's many of them out there. But that's what it was like on the state sector. I moved to the private sector, and you just don't have that same pressure on you in the lesson, and you don't have that same structure, and you don't have anybody telling you exactly how you should teach.
Yeah.
And what they do is basically say, well, we trust you as a professional to deliver your lesson in the best way that you feel that you can do it. And obviously it's different to the state sector because you have customers here because they pay for their education.
Right.
Now, basically, if you do a good job and the students are thinking, oh yeah, my teacher is supplying my needs, whatever that is, then actually the pressure is off you quite a lot in terms of all of those little small things that you have to tick in every lesson that you have to do in the state sector. So that's one of the biggest things is behaviour. Behaviour is a hell of a lot better. So it can in some ways, you can de-skill yourself to a certain extent because you don't have to deal with the same behaviour issues. And if you do deal with behaviour issues, they're different behaviour issues to what you would deal with if you were in a state school. very,
Yeah.
very different.
And do you think that having that freedom, that the same concept of the teacher in the classroom has more autonomy to teach the way they want to teach, do you think that also applies to, for example, departments or schools to, for example, decide to set or not set, or kind of make unorthodox decisions in terms of structuring their classes and setting out their classes as well?
There's less autonomy in terms of the setting, but currently, again, that depends on your cohort, and the cohort of the school that I work in is very, very high ability, and that
Okay.
was always my love, really, because I
Yeah.
was in my first school, which was a Cotswold Community High School a long time ago. So I was gifted and talented coordinator there when
Yeah.
the G&T thing all came out, when under Labour, where they were very big about pushing
Yeah.
the higher
Yeah.
learners. So that was my job there. So I've always been interested in like pushing really, really high ability learners. So it suits me down to the ground, because they are mostly high ability learners. Don't get me wrong, we have a tail, and we do have students who are getting 4s, 5s, 6s.
Yeah.
Across GCSE, but we have majority of them are getting the really higher grades. So we don't really set here. We decided
Right.
not to. And what I've found is that the leadership take into account the views of the head of department when they're making that decision about whether they do or they don't.
Okay.
Which I've never had before. So, I've never been asked whether we're going to set, and you wouldn't really be asked that in a state school.
Yeah. Although I've worked in a few schools now, and I think my current school is one of them. I feel that the heads of department are very much listened to in terms of the decision making for what's best for them as a department. I think that, I mean, I know a few years ago when before I joined my current school, which is a standard comprehensive secondary, that it was left up to the English teachers essentially, and the head of department, in conversation with line managers on SLT, about whether or not to set in Key Stage 3 or 4, and those decisions were made definitely in consultation. But I do hear what you're saying. I hear so many other stories, and I've worked in a place that was very top down, dictatorial. This is my vision, and these are the decisions, and you will get in line or get out kind of atmosphere. So I think there is a huge range in what is allowed within state schools. But yeah, I hear what you're saying. So when you say your school doesn't really set, does that apply to every subject?
Yeah, it applies. It applies to not every subject. Most subjects, I'd say. In
Okay.
maths, there is more setting that goes on.
Yeah.
But in other subjects, it tends, and there's a little bit with English, because we get students, obviously with English as a foreign language, and
Right,
so they have
right.
particular needs, and so you'll have people who are really, really have very acute needs in terms of English, other ones who are very much confident, like people who come from Singapore, for example, where their first language is English, but they still have to jump through the hoops in this
Yeah.
country to pass certain English tests.
Yeah.
So we have the range. So they do
Yeah.
have a setting here, but in science and most of the other subjects, no, we don't have setting. We used to, but
Yeah.
we found that I did a little research before I came in, and I used AI for that, by the way. And I did a bit of research on setting, and I thought, because I've read parts of Hattie, which I'm not particularly keen on, but
No, nor am I.
no, and I've listened to some stuff done by Dylan William, and I don't agree with some of that either, but
Yeah.
But the thing is that it says that there's limited evidence. When I put it into Copilot and asked what is the teaching learning evidence, and it gave me a summary, it says there's limited evidence that it actually makes any difference whatsoever.
Yeah.
And I thought that said everything about research.
There is limited evidence. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
exactly. So when we did setting, we found that you would have top sets. We used to have two top sets and then two middle sets, and then we would have well, I hate the term bottom set. I mean, I hate the term.
Yeah. I don't think anyone's a fan of that.
It's horrible. You shouldn't put a kid into a box and then
Nope.
stamp on them like that. I don't think. Um, but we did that, and what we found is that the two top sets, because they're so good at this school, it's much easier. It's easier to teach them, and you kind of almost in some ways you can de-skill yourself if you do that, because you're not having to try as hard as you are in different areas and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
But then when we mixed them up, because we found that you've got to use your skills a lot more, and you also, those students that are really very good sometimes have social awkwardness in our school, because they're coming from countries that basically they might be in a 60-person lesson in China, for example.
Yeah.
There might be 60 people in a lesson, and they just sit at the back and they don't say anything, and they've never said anything, and then they come here and then they're expected to engage in a lesson and be like that, and it's very hard for them to come out of their shell. So if you put mixed ability, you can have someone who's struggling like that next to someone who's a bit more exuberant, and you can pull them out of their shell, and you can and do that. And you can also, with the mixture, is you have to think about that seating plan when you're doing, and think about who best. And this is the same if you're in a state school and you had different kind of almost within sets, you would have different abilities.
Oh yeah.
State school, and therefore it's very important where you put the people next to each other to get the best out of each other. And I think it just makes you. I think the wider your cohort is, the more I'm in favour of setting. The thinner your cohort is, the less I'm in favour of setting.
Yeah, and I would agree with that, and I think that kind of sums it up for me as well, because every teacher I've talked to, I can always get them to come around to the point that there's 2 points. Number one, there's not a lot of conclusive evidence, as you said, either way. I mean, some studies show that mixed ability has a slightly negative effect on the top end and a slightly positive effect on the middle and the bottom. But
that's exactly
that's inconclusive. Exactly, and that's not even enough to be conclusive. But every single teacher knows, and everyone will agree. This is point number 2, that the narrower the difference between to use the horrible terminology, the top student and the bottom student, the highest attaining student and the currently lowest attaining student in the room, the narrower that gap is, the easier it is to teach, and the easier it is to spin your 32 plates at a time, and the easier it is to match people up in a way that is mutually beneficial, so you actually get a synergy in the room rather than someone being held back, or someone trying to be helped by a kid trying to play TA, or somebody. Do you know what I mean? And so I think, well, if the research is unconvincing at best, but there is an undeniable, enormous benefit to the teacher to have the breadth of ability in that classroom narrowed, because they can teach better. They don't have to spend 5 hours differentiating, or whatever we're calling it these days. And it's just like, put a number on stress levels, it is so much lower because you're not running around like a headless chicken. To me, that alone is clear. If it's not going to hurt them, and it's going to make the teacher a better teacher who is healthier, happier, better rested, and more willing and joyous in the classroom, then that's reason enough. I feel like decisions have been made that are supposedly in the best interest of students with little evidence to back them up. But every anecdote from every teacher, we know how hard it is to teach fully mixed 32 fully mixed ability kids in a classroom and feel like you're not failing every single one of them. We know how hard that is. Why are we being put? Sorry, no, just me ranting. Why are we being put through it, I suppose, is my question.
I would challenge anyone to go and just speak to a primary school teacher.
Yeah.
you go and speak
Yeah.
to a primary school and you see how many books they take home and how many different activities they're having to put in those books and how many, I have the utmost respect for primary school teachers. I mean, I think
I couldn't do it.
I think they're heroes, to be honest. I think they're amazing people.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's a benefit that my friend is a primary school teacher, and maybe if he's listening, that's for him. But it's if you talk to a primary school teacher, the amount of stress they have to go through because of the complete mixed ability classes that they've got, and actually when they have mixed ability classes like that, they're having to have TAs in there helping them do it. And again, that then depends on your relationship with that TA, and it depends on the money you have in that school in order to pay for TA, which most schools are really struggling for money to pay for TA's wages. And it depends on the training and the quality of that TA, because you can have some really wonderful TAs who actually teach the students. But I've had the experience of having some TAs who, because it's so hard to teach some students, they just tell them the answers instead of kind of
I've seen the whole range. And then similarly with TAs,
they're wonderful.
No, they're wonderful, but it's sometimes things just don't work together. Sometimes things just don't gel. And so, even if you have brilliant TAs, if you've got 3 TAs and there's 8 English classes on at the same time and they're all mixed ability, and you've got kids who need support in every single one of those classes, where are those TAs supposed to go? Well, they don't go everywhere. They can't go everywhere. So the teacher is having to constantly firefight while trying to teach everyone in the room and trying to challenge and extend the other one. Whereas you could just have the top end, where you could just have a smaller range of students that you can more specifically cater for, teach more specifically in the way that those specific kids need, or at least have less of a range of what they need. And then no one's time is being wasted. Because in English specifically, it's difficult to I think sometimes people feel it's harder in English to argue in favor of setting, but I actually don't think it is, because we have such a narrow list of texts to choose from. I'm talking GCSE now for literature, but there's a huge difference between some of those texts. There is, and you can choose different texts. It's not like we have to cover the exact same amount of chemistry equations or whatever on earth you do in your time. We can choose different books. There's quite a bit of flexibility. Language, we have none. Language, everyone's in the same boat, so there's not. There's less of an argument there. But even with language, the way I teach students, a student who's struggling with the subject, to approach those language questions that everyone has to answer, they're totally unseen texts. The way I teach the students to approach those questions and structure their answers and what I tell them to focus on, it's hugely different. A student who's really struggling with that subject versus a student who has every potential to get a 9. They approach the questions and respond to them almost completely differently, and not in a way that I'm limiting anyone or I'm overcomplicating things for anyone else. But it's just, I've been doing this long enough. I know what the exam boards want. I know how to do it for different students, and you just can't do that when you have the full range in the room. You end up splitting your time and no one's getting what they actually deserve. It just, I feel more and more every time I go to work that I'm just wasting the time of myself and everyone around me. It's incredibly frustrating.
We have the problem, and this is a Michael Gove creation, really, which is when he changed his GCSEs in 2015, and the new GCSEs came in. We have the exam in chemistry, which is similar to what you're talking about, is they wanted to put more maths into chemistry.
Yeah.
So they put more maths into chemistry. And then what they've been doing over the last 8 years-ish, something like 9 years, is that difficulty of maths has been going up in the exams. So it's been going up. So chemists out there will know what I'm talking about, because I teach AQA Chem.
Yeah.
And 2-3 years ago, you would never get a gas calculation that was having multiple balancing. Now, chemists will understand what I'm saying. Put lots of different numbers in the balance equation and just calculate total volumes. But I think it was 2 years ago, suddenly this question appears out of nowhere, which I've never taught to my GCSE students ever.
Oh
And I
no.
teach a very kind of, lots of very high ability students, and I
Yep.
don't teach it to them. And I didn't think it and that's another thing. I know I'm going off topic a little bit here, but if you are having
That's fine.
an exam board who are changing to a certain extent how difficult they make the questions over years, and then you have a group that is not setted and is absolutely all over, in terms of ability is very wide ranging. Calculations are the ones where you literally cannot do that. That is I respect any teacher who could even say that they can cope with doing gas calculations with a student, and then at the same time just doing 1 mole per decimeter, 24 decimeters cubed is the volume of 1 mole of a gas. Because there's a difference between a gas calculation, which is lots of balanced equations, or just saying 24 decimeters cubed. Now, the lower end kids, you just say 24 decimeters cubed. The other ones, you're going to have to go through these really complicated calculations, and you just can't do that if there's a big mixture of people in the room, because you'll lose a third or a quarter of your room straight away. And the only other way you can get around that is if you had somebody else in the room who was teaching. Now, one of the great ways you can do that, which I have done before, is get the students to teach each other, so get the really clever ones to teach the ones who are not quite getting it and things like that. But again, it's nowhere near as good as if you actually put them into a group and they were all similar abilities for you.
No, of course not. And then if you do that too often, you run the risk of I mean, maybe not in your school with the students you have or their temperaments or anything, but I was an unholy terror as a student. I would if I taught myself as a teenager, I would I don't know, I'd probably want to throw myself out a window. And I used to get so angry when I finished something and I got something and I understood something, and then it was either, oh, go help this person, or like as if I'm your personal unpaid TA, And I went to an independent school. I went to a private school as a teenager. So I remember thinking, this is how disgusting I was. Why are my parents paying for me to teach other parents' kids? that was where my mind went. And I was like, how dare you? And then if they didn't do that, it was, oh, here's some busy work. Here's a worksheet because you get it. And I'm thinking, well, what else is there? Why do I have to wait for Tom, Dick, and Harry to understand it before I can? And it used to just absolutely infuriate me. And I used to have that feeling all through school in the subjects where I was top at. I mean, maths, not so much, but there were biology was my best subject in school. So I used to feel really annoyed in biology all the time. So you don't want to overuse the high ability kids that way. But we do need to take a brief break. I know we've had a couple of there's been a couple people who've said hello and tried to ring in. So after the ads, if anyone wants to call back, try calling in again and sharing your thoughts. See, I've got myself worked up now. Put myself back in my 16-year-old self, and now I'm angry again. But yeah, any listeners who want to call in or message in with their thoughts are very welcome to do so.
I've always considered myself to be a caring head teacher who acts sensitively to support staff mental health. But what I found increasingly difficult was managing the negative impact on staff mental health when resolving issues related to their employment or daily work. Heartfelt Leadership has been developed by Teachwell Toolkit as a handbook to support head teachers to overcome the challenges of school improvement while supporting staff well-being. We know that difficult conversations can quickly turn into conflict if procedures are not fully transparent, understood and followed. Our handbook takes you through step-by-step processes while maintaining mutual respect, avoiding conflict and finding solutions.
At Bloomsbury Education, we're passionate about supporting teachers with high-quality professional development books from leading experts. Whether you're navigating your first crucial years as an early career teacher or a more experienced teacher looking to refresh your practice or take a step up into leadership, our award-winning books are here to help. We publish practical books to support teaching across primary and secondary, from the very best in research-led practice to trusted advice on inclusivity, behaviour and curriculum design. Visit the Bloomsbury Education website at bloomsbury.com/education to find out more and use code BLOOMTTR24 to save 20% on all education titles. Bloomsbury Education, books for every step of your teaching journey.
This is Teachers Talk Radio News with John Gibbs. The first story this week is once again Ofsted. Following last week's news that, contrary to advice from the cross-party committee in the House of Commons, the government would persist with single-word assessments of schools. This week, Ofsted Chief Sir Martin Oliver announced that he would like Ofsted inspections to feel more like a peer review. At the Schools and Academies show on the 2nd of May, Sir Martin indicated that Ofsted had embarked on a reform journey, and he further noted that he wanted Ofsted inspections to feel like, in some ways, a peer review system. While Ofsted and Sir Martin have launched the Big Listen consultation, a group of former Ofsted inspectors, academics, experienced teachers and head teachers, led by Professor Colin Richards and Frank Norris MBE, have launched the alternative Big Listen. They've set up their own website and are accepting responses and views from across the education world. The 50% rule in English faith school admissions, introduced in 2010, stipulating that where newly established academies with a religious character are oversubscribed, at least 50% of their places would be open places, i.e. allocated without reference to faith, is to be scrapped in plans announced by the government. The government also plans to allow churches and religious groups to open faith-based schools for children with special educational needs, which campaigners warned could raise ethical issues. Proposals to scrap the 50% cap, which only applies when schools have more applicants than places, are opposed by Rowan Williams, the former Archbishop of Canterbury, on the grounds that it would be divisive and likely to penalise disadvantaged children by denying them access to local schools. While the government believes that faith-based schools give parents greater choice, encourage better behaviour, and also academic outcomes, Andrew Coxton, the Chief Executive of Humanist UK, is quoted as saying, "The proposal to allow 100% religious discrimination in new state faith schools will increase religious and racial segregation." Teaching assistants are again in the news this week. While recent stories of their declining numbers, their stagnating pay, have been regular features of the news, this week a survey reported in Secondary Education News involving 6,000 teaching assistants in England and Wales found that 39% are covering classes for at least 5 hours a week. A further 15% say they are leading full classes for at least 11 hours a week. National guidance states that support staff should not actively teach any classes they cover, but 75% of the teaching assistants said they have ended up teaching rather than supervising. Astria Academy Trust, which controls 26 schools in the Yorkshire and Cambridgeshire area, is seeking to hire a new executive head teacher on a salary between £116,000 and £133,000 a year. These salaries might seem generous in the light that the St Ivo Academy, a secondary school in St Ives and run by the Trust, is making cuts for classroom resources, but it should also be placed in the light that the new executive principal position comes with 3 layers of management above it, Above the new executive principal would be Secondary Regional Director for Cambridgeshire, Jo Mayhill Johnson. Above her, in the Trust's hierarchy, sits Richard Tutt, its Director for Secondary Education, and above him, Rowena Hackwood, Astria's Chief Executive. And the number of Astria's employees paid at least $100,000 a year has increased from 7 to 10 from 2022 to 2023. It is reported that Ofqual have warned that exam results, GCSE and A-level, will be down this year. This will be the result of the return to pre-pandemic conditions, meaning candidates had no prior warning of what might be coming up in the exams, and the lost learning that resulted from the COVID pandemic. In an interview in Education Week, the statistician Dennis Sherwood once again stated his view that A-level and GCSE grades are only reliable to one grade either way. If you wish to listen to interviews with Dennis Sherwood, you can find them in the Teachers Talk Radio back catalogue, or follow many of these news items on the weekly review on Sunday mornings. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with John Gibbs. Thank you for listening.
So we have a caller who I think I recognize, who I think has been on this show before. Emily, are you there?
Hello, Rae.
Hello, Emily. What would you like to contribute today?
Myself and my colleague John are listening in today, who's been a really invaluable TA for the past 5 years in my school setting. It's such an interesting topic. I mean, Rich, what amazing expertise that you have and have given to the show so far today. I just wanted to talk a bit about setting, really, as an English teacher and also a media teacher at my current school.
Okay.
I have set English lessons for years 7 to 11, and I think setting is invaluable. The reasons for this is you are able to really meet the needs of those learners within the classes, really, and it's just so. It's a lot easier. It makes life a lot easier when you're setting, especially for Key Stage 4, in terms of.
Sorry, Emily, I'm just gonna interrupt you because I can feel hackles being raised across the country when we say it makes things easier, and I can hear certain groups of teachers shouting, "But it's not about you. It's about the students." But I just want to reiterate, because you've just repeated something or echoed something that I said earlier, which is if teachers don't have an easy enough job, there aren't going to be any teachers anymore. So if the data is inconclusive and if setting is not hurting students, let's just accept that as a theory just for a second. The fact that it is so much easier, you can phrase it however you want to make yourself feel better. The fact that it is so much easier for teachers to adequately differentiate for every single student in their classroom, if their class is set, is reason enough to do it. So thank you for saying that. Please continue.
I agree with you there. I mean, for my media students, they're all mixed ability Key Stage 4 students. And for their English, you might have learners in that class who are lower ability and high ability. And it is reasonably accessible for all the learners to meet what level that they are at and to differentiate in media studies. However, English does come into it a lot, especially with extended pieces of writing and vocabulary. I mean, if I was working for the higher ability learners to get 7 to 9s, then it's all about how they are able to use theory within their spot responses and high level vocabulary. Doesn't mean that for the lower attaining students that I'm not supporting them to achieve the highest grade possible. Of course I am. However, it is differentiated vocabulary for accessibility. And I think being able to, set classes based in English language, I teach top set. I don't want to say bottom set at all, because they are working between a grade 2 and a 3, trying to get their grade 4s for English. And it is all about being able to pass the exam at this point in time, and about differentiating for their needs based on, if I was working with a top set, it would be about getting, if, for example, I was teaching structure, I would teach them what happens in the middle, what happens at the start, middle and end, what is the change in structure. Whereas in a higher ability set, I'd be teaching them about the exposition, I'd be teaching them about all different techniques that would go straight over a student's head in a different
And
set.
of course. And then this comes back to what I was saying earlier. And if you're trying to teach fundamentally different ways of approaching a question or approaching a problem, you're wasting everyone's time, because you could just separate the classes into groups where everyone who needs this one approach, everyone who needs this one level of working is in one room, and they get focused attention on what they need for 5 hours a week or whatever it is. You can either have that, or you can have them spread across different classes. And like, for some of the lesson, the teacher's doing what they need. Some of the lesson, they're just not, it's too hard. Some of the lesson, it's too easy. It just, the more I talk about it, the more obvious it seems, but do carry on.
I agree, especially with setting for the lower sets. It's the classes are smaller. They get individualized feedback for them. I'm able to circulate around them for their individual needs. For example, I have a class of 18 for my lower sets, and in my higher sets I have larger classes. And I can tell you now, being able to have that personable approach with them is so motivating. And a lot of people may say, well, setting, it causes low motivation, and it causes a decrease in confidence. But actually it doesn't, because when you think you've got a group of learners with you who are really motivated to achieve, and yes, that in terms of attainment they aren't as good as other students, but they're not sitting there in the class not trying. They are working so hard. I'm so proud of my year 11s, and they want to be there. They want to be able to get their grade 4s, grade 5s. They want to be able to stretch themselves. They want to be able to share their work with the class, and it's so empowering.
And they often feel more comfortable to do it. So we've one of my previous schools, I think, took this a little bit too far, because the actual sets and who is in them turned into a bit of a joke. But they used to go from sets 1 all the way down to 9. So you can imagine it became an insult. It became a point of banter amongst kids, like, oh, you're set 8, oh, you're set 9. And they'd do something silly one time, and someone would be like, that set 9 behavior, what are you doing? To each other, which is really, I'm laughing, but it's not funny. And like that's harsh. But you can think of the flip side of that. If you have, okay, let's say 3 or 4 sets, right? You have a small nurture group of sorts. And Emily, when you were, it was you who was texting in when we tried the show before, talking about a small nurture group, I think. What you said a fortnight ago, I think, is the best way of doing it. If you have a small group of focus students that's got 10, 12 kids in it, and then the other classes kind of you can afford to have more in there as you move up, then they are in a safe environment. They're in an environment where they're not worried that the smart kids are gonna, I apologize for my cat screaming in the background, they're not worried that the quote unquote smart kids are gonna be laughing at them or thinking they're dumb. Like, and people talk about, what must it feel like for a student to be in the quote unquote dumb class? Well, I'm thinking about my experiences in maths when I was in high school, because that was not my best subject by a long shot. And I was the dumb kid in that class. And I can tell you that was a heck of a lot worse than when they finally moved me out of that class and put me where I actually should have been. Like, put me in the lower set. I went to them and I begged them to put me in the lower set so I didn't feel like the idiot in the room. And it's, everyone talks about the negative kind of social and emotional impacts of being in a lower set, but what are the social and emotional impacts of being a weaker kid in a class full of students that you think are smarter than you? How often do we think about the flip side of that? So so thank you so much, Emily, for your input. I feel like the talk about social and emotional development in students with regards to mixability versus setting is quite often twisted, or at least skimmed off so that it suits the preferred narrative, because you can make an argument either way. Richard, do you have any thoughts on anything? I know what Emily said was but
I've got a different thought about it, and it's about this comment you said about the easier to teach.
Yeah.
What actually is the benefit to teachers? And I'm talking from my own perspective. I know there's plenty of people who are probably better at doing certain things than I am, but from my own perspective, if you're teaching 5-year groups, you're in a secondary school, 7 to 11, you're teaching 5 different year groups, and you don't have them setted, for example. You're going to be spend more time planning. If you have them setted as well, you know where you're going to with those students. And actually, it's really, really, one of the most important things is exam knowledge. When you're getting up to the top end, is actually do you know your exam board really, really well? And I can say from my perspective, if you've got loads of little mixed classes and things like that, knowing your exam board is just so much harder, because you've got to put the time and effort and things like that. But if you've got a setted group and I'm pushing all of these towards a certain level, then actually it's easier for you to get that knowledge of that exam board to a high level, so that you can actually push it to the level that you need to get them to the certain. And it's actually really, I know in chemistry, so I only became more confident when I was, in terms of teaching it, the higher stuff, when I was actually pushed to do that, because I was having setting that was pushing me to the higher levels all the time. It's a very difficult thing to manage loads and loads of different classes at loads and loads of different levels. So setting helps you in terms of your preparation as well.
Makes you a better teacher and better able to support the students in front of you, because within the system we have, and I know you're at an independent school and things may be different, but I'm so sorry about my cats. You have experience in the state sector, and you know what this is like. We have such limited funding. There are such limited resources available. We can't just hire 1 million teachers, not that they exist anyway, because everyone's realizing this is a very difficult career. We have such limited resources available to us. So we are constantly in a position where something has to give. And if anything that helps teachers better support their students without spending more time that they don't have, creating more resources that they don't have, it should, that should be a priority. I think is a fairly obvious thing. And I feel I'm definitely not talking about primary teachers here, because as you said, they are absolute heroes, and I have no idea. I feel like they're all secret wizards, because there's no way I could do that job. I feel that a lot of the people advocating for these kind of philosophically based mixability classes, because of feelings or whatever, or a student's emotional or social development, don't have a full timetable, or don't remember what that's like.
Really, because that's you have these people with these philosophies and things like that. You actually have to teach 30 students in front of you, and you have to get the best out of students. Philosophies sound great and they sound brilliant. Yeah. You've actually got to get control of these people, get them wanting to learn, and philosophies don't help sometimes with that.
No,
nice,
and they're nice, but do it with 32 kids, 6 hours in a row. I have 6 hours. I have 6 hours of my beautiful mixed ability classes, who I love dearly, but just absolutely drain me, because I I'm not a dancing clown. I don't have limitless energy or time, and I cannot spin 32 plates at once. So I feel like it's not best for the students. It definitely makes me feel like a personal failure every pretty much every lesson of the day, except my year 11s, because I have what is it's not quite a nurture group. They're not a bottom set, because their grades are actually all over the place. There's some students that are doing really well. They're not in there because they're the lowest attaining students. They're in that very small group for a wide range of reasons. But there's 9 of them. There are 9 students in that room, and I know them very well, and it's manageable. And I feel like that is the only class where I walk out of it thinking like, oh yeah, I'm still okay at this job. And that's really demoralizing. It really, really is.
Well, the thing is, I did a so-called or the bottom set years and years ago, and what I found with the bottom sets is that you could teach them almost anything. It's just whether they remembered it before they came back to the next lesson.
Yeah. Well, there is also that as well.
I've always considered myself to be a caring head teacher who acts sensitively to support staff mental health. But what I found increasingly difficult was managing the negative impact on staff mental health when resolving issues related to their employment or daily work. Heartfelt Leadership has been developed by Teachwell Toolkit as a handbook to support head teachers to overcome the challenges of school improvement while supporting staff well-being. We know that difficult conversations can quickly turn into conflict if procedures are not fully transparent, understood and followed. Our handbook takes you through step-by-step processes while maintaining mutual respect, avoiding conflict and finding solutions.
At Bloomsbury Education, we're passionate about supporting teachers with high-quality professional development books from leading experts. Whether you're navigating your first crucial years as an early career teacher or a more experienced teacher looking to refresh your practice or take a step up into leadership, our award-winning books are here to help. We publish practical books to support teaching across primary and secondary, from the very best in research-led practice to trusted advice on inclusivity, behaviour and curriculum design. Visit the Bloomsbury Education website at bloomsbury.com/education to find out more, and use code BLOOMTTR24 to save 20% on all education titles. Bloomsbury Education, books for every step of your teaching journey.
Sorry, Richard, I cut you off a little bit there. So sorry.
No, it's fine. No, it's. I had this bottom set, and basically what happens, like I said, you teach them, and then they forget. But if you have that bottom, if you have a group of ability, whether it be the bottom set, top set, middle set, whatever it is, you can actually go to that specification and say, right, where are my wins that I can get in here that I feel as a teacher the easiest way to get them to level? Because when you're getting kids who are at that end, you know they're not going to do, for me personally, chemistry teacher, you know they're not going to do chemistry later on in their life. You know you're just trying to get them through that hoop to get a good grade so that they can get on to the next stage of their life and do whatever they choose to do. So you've got to get them to that place, and so setting allows you to be able to pick and choose the different areas. Of course you have to teach the curriculum, but you can focus on different areas and make sure, I know I can embed that, they'll understand this, they'll understand that type of thing, and setting gives you that as well.
Yeah, it does. So you can definitely target it a little bit more. I mean, English, I feel like for English language anyway, there's a little bit more pressure in terms of the English and maths thing. So all the students are trying to get their language grade and trying to get their maths grade as well. So those two subjects, there's a little bit, it's a bit of a different experience. But for English literature, I hear you. You know, there are certain things that definitely have to give at some point for a lot of kids. And if you've got a group where everyone's kind of in the same boat, then that allows you again to focus a little bit better on what the group needs. Now, one of the ideas that came up last time, and Emily mentioned this briefly, or she did last week, I can't remember, but my last school also for Key Stage 3 had just changed their system. So they decided that everyone was mixed ability in year 7 for English, because Mostly because whenever we tried to set students in year 7 anyway, it was just an absolute joke. And the whole concept, excuse me, the whole concept with English sets at that school was that they're very flexible because, we believed, and I personally believe that these things have to be flexible. You shouldn't just assign a kid a category, stick them in a box and leave them there to, ferment for the next 5 years. So the idea was that sets were flexible, but because we were setting in year 7 and the data from primary was questionable at best, students, they have this dip when they start year 7s. They weren't performing particularly well on their baselines. They weren't really accurate. We ended up doing an absolute bucket load of set changes in year 7 and year 8. And it was just ridiculous. So we decided, let's just give them year 7 in their forms in English to kind of acclimatize to the situation, get used to secondary school, get used to the subject, what that means in secondary. And then at the end of year 7, we'll set them. Okay. So that was okay for a few years. But then there were, shocker, funding issues. So the nurture groups that we had for year 8 got taken away. And so what they decided to do the year that I left, actually, so I haven't witnessed this firsthand, but they changed it so that for year 8 and year 9, there was a top set. So the highest attaining students, and remember, all of these groupings are flexible. Students can move up, they can move down. There was a top set. There was a smaller, as small as they could possibly manage it, quote unquote, bottom set, were the students who needed that smaller group and the extra attention, the extra focus on basic skills. So we weren't wasting anyone else's time on full stops when they knew how to use them, basic things you would think. So there was that group. And then the other 2 classes were mixed. Rather than having a set 2 and a set 3, it was just everybody was mixed up. And to me, that would be so useful if you applied it, even just that version of setting, to Key Stage 4, which my school currently doesn't have, because then at least you'd have the smaller group where you can focus on basic skills, or by the time they get to year 11, doing what you have to do to get that 4. And then the top end, the kids who have potential to get 7 to 9s, actually get the guidance and the support and the challenge and the push to get there. Because God knows they're I look at our 7 to 9 grades and I just think, if you gave me the 32 top attaining kids in this year group for 2 years, I could skyrocket those numbers, and I will prove it to you. Just I'm so close to begging. But anyway,
and then one thing you mentioned there, sorry, that I thought was really important, is the ability to be fluid.
Yeah,
often
yeah.
When you're timetabling, some timetablers don't allow that. So and it's the way in which the timetablers do it. If you can allow it, because I've had a kid before when I was working in the state sector who started off in bottom set and who ended up in top set. I know they don't happen very often, but they do happen sometimes. So you've got to have that fluidity and movement.
Especially if they're EAL, you get students who need to be in the smaller group to get their language skills, but then by the time their language skills,
we get that all the time. We get people who don't have huge their English is not particularly great. They're not doing particularly well in the first year they're here, and then by the end of that year, the English is a lot better, and then suddenly they're flying and they're getting 9s across the board or something like that.
I've seen it a lot. Language. I've seen it a lot. And again, how is it fair to dump a kid in a giant? Anyway, so having the smaller group supporting basic skills, and then having the top set and allowing them to get the grades that they're actually capable of, so their education is not wasted, their education is not being compromised, and then everybody else is mixed enough, and then at least the mixed groups, it comes back to what I was saying before, the range is narrowed, so there's no one feeling silly because they feel lower than anyone else. There's no one feeling bored because they feel that they're higher than anyone else. The teacher has a realistic, a teachable cohort, in that class, that they don't have to spend all night planning and preparing for and teaching, and then trying to teach 4 lessons at the same time. So to me, that's kind of the best compromise, where everybody gets what they actually need, instead of just chucking everyone together and hoping for the best, which is where I feel a lot of schools are at. Yeah, that's my view. Anyway, do you have any Any final comments on the subject? Any kind of advice to schools with setting, or what you think definitely works or definitely doesn't?
Well, what I would say is that fluidity is important, as I said, but it's really the knowledge of the teachers of the different students.
Yeah.
Because when you're doing the setting, and when schools are doing the setting, they need to take into account the knowledge of the teachers in those students. Because even though a teacher might, that person might be in that set, they might know that person could be in a higher set because they'll work really well with that person or work really well with that person. And it's not just always about that's your level. It's about where these kids work and how they fit together and how the teacher's knowledge is really, really important.
Absolutely. Would agree. Well, thank you so much, Richard, for joining us. And excuse me. And for all of our listeners and callers as well. Thank you so much. Hope everyone has a lovely evening or day whenever you're listening. And we hope to see you soon.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.